Hello my dear YouTube friends, welcome to Mia's Fairy Tale World. Yes, I know it's been a while, but here you have me. If you're new to my channel, hi, welcome. My name is Mia. I live in Denmark with my husband David and 4 cats. So if you aren't already subscribed, please consider doing so. You will find the subscribe button right down there. Next to it, you will find a bell. If you ding the bell and choose all, you will be notified whenever I put up a new video. And if you're back, hi friends, I'm so happy to see you again. And both of you, new and old, give this video a thumbs up. It really does help get my channel out there. Yeah, I hope you're all doing well and you have a great Saturday or whatever day you're watching this video. So, if you haven't been here before, I am reading my fairy tale off the tablet today. Usually I read it off of my phone, but that one ran out of battery. So, the story I'm going to read to you is very, very long. So I'm going to cut it into 2 videos. So you will get the second part next week. So don't forget to come back and watch that one, so that you get the entire story. But again, remember the thumbs up and let's get to it. This story is called The Goloshes of Fortune. A beginning. In a house in Copenhagen, not far from the King's New Market, a very large party had assembled. The host and his family expecting, no doubt, to receive invitations in return. One half of the company were already seated at the card tables. The other half seemed to be waiting the result of their hostess' question. Well, how shall we amuse ourselves? Conversation followed, which after a while began to prove very entertaining. Among other subjects, it turned upon the events of the Middle Ages, which some persons maintained were more full of interest than our own times. Councillor Knapp defended this opinion so warmly that the lady of the house immediately went over to his side, and both exclaimed against Astor's essays on the ancient and modern times, in which the preference is given to our own. The councillor considered the times of the Danish king hens as the noblest and happiest. The conversation on this topic were only interrupted for a moment by the arrival of a newspaper, which did not, however, contain much worth reading, and while it is still going on, we will pay a visit to the anteroom, in which cloaks, sticks, and goloshes were carefully placed. Here sat 2 maidens, one young, the other old, as if they had come and were waiting to accompany their mistresses home. But on looking at them more closely, it could easily be seen that they were no common servants. Their shapes were too graceful, their complexions too delicate, and the cut of their dresses much too elegant. They were 2 fairies. The younger was not Fortune herself, but the chambermaid of one of the Fortune's attendants, who carries about her more trifling gifts. The elder one, who was named Care, looked rather gloomy. She always goes about to perform her own business in person, for then she knows it is probably done. They were telling each other where they had been during the day. The messenger and Fortune had only transacted a few unimportant matters. For instance, she had preserved a new bonnet from a shower of rain, and obtained for an honest man a bow from a titled nobody, and so on. But she had something extraordinary to relate after all. "I must tell you," said she, "that today is my birthday, and in honor of it I have been entrusted with a pair of goloshes to introduce amongst mankind. These goloshes have the property of making everyone who puts them on imagine himself in any place he wishes, or that he exists at any period. Every wish is fulfilled at the moment it is expressed, so that for so that for once mankind have the chance of being happy. No, replied Care, you may depend upon it that whoever puts on those goloshes will be very unhappy, and bless the moment in which he can get rid of them. What are you thinking of? Replied the other. Now see, I will place them by the door. Someone will take them instead of his own, and he will be a happy man. This was the end of their conversation. What happened to the counselor? It was late when Councillor Knapp, lost in thought about the times of King Hans, desired to return home, and fate so ordered it that he put on the goloshes of fortune instead of his own, and walked out into East Street. Through the magic power of the goloshes, he was at once carried back 300 years to the times of King Hans, for which he had been longing for when he put them on. Therefore he immediately set his foot into the mud and mire of the street, which in those days possessed no pavement. "Why, this is horrible! How dreadfully dirty it is," said the councillor, "and the whole pavement had vanished, and the lamps are all out." The moon had not yet risen high enough to penetrate the thick foggy air, and all the objects around him were confused together in the darkness. At the nearest corner a lamp hung before a picture of the Madonna, but the light it gave was almost useless, for he only perceived it when he came quite close, and his eyes fell upon the painted figures of the mother and child. "That is most likely a museum of art," thought he, "and they have forgotten to take down the sign." Two men in the dress of olden times passed by him. "What odd figures," thought he. "They must be returning from some masquerade." Sorry. Suddenly he heard the sound of drums and fifes, and then a blazing light from torches shone upon him. The councillor stared with astonishment as he beheld a most strange procession pass before him. First came a whole troop of drummers, beating their drums very cleverly. They were followed by life guards with longbows and crossbows. The principal person in the procession was a clerical-looking gentleman. The astonished councillor asked what it all meant and who the gentleman might be. "That is the Bishop of Sealand." "Good gracious!" he exclaimed. "What in the world has happened to the bishop? What can he be thinking about?" Then he shook his head and said, "It cannot possibly be the bishop himself." While musing on this strange affair, and without looking to the right or left, he walked through East Street and over the High Bridge Place. The bridge which he supposed led to the Palace Square was nowhere to be found, but instead he saw a bank and some shallow water, and two people who sat in a boat. "Does the gentleman wish to be ferried over the Holm?" asked one. "To the Holm!" exclaimed the councillor, not knowing in what age he was now existed in. "I want to go to Christianshavn in Little Turf Street." The men stared at him. "Please tell me where the bridge is," said he. "It is shameful that the lamps are not lighted here, and it is as muddy as if one were walking in a marsh." But the more he talked with the boatsmen, the less they could understand each other. "I don't understand your outlandish talk," he cried at last, angrily turning his back upon them. He could not, however, find the bridge nor any railings. "What a scandalous condition this place is in," said he. Never, certainly, had he found his own time so miserable as on this evening. "I think it would be better for me to take a coach, but where are they?" There was not one to be seen. "I shall be obliged to go back to the King's New Market," said he, "where there are plenty of carriages standing, or I shall never reach Christianshavn." Then he went towards East Street, and had nearly passed through it when the moon burst forth from a cloud. "Dear me! What have they been erecting here?" he cried, as he caught sight of the East Gate, which in olden time used to stand at the end of East Street. However, he found an opening through which he had passed, and came out upon where he expected to find the New Market. Nothing was to be seen but an open meadow surrounded by a few bushes, through which ran a broad canal or stream. A few miserable-looking wooden booths for the accommodation of Dutch watermen stood on the opposite shore. "Either I behold a Fata Morgana, or I must be tipsy," groaned the councillor. "What can it be? What is the matter with me?" He turned back in the full conviction that he must be ill. In walking through the street this time he examined the houses more closely. He found that most of them were built of lath and plaster, and many only had a thatched roof. "I am certainly all wrong," said he, with a sigh, "and yet I only drank one glass of punch. But I cannot bear even that, and it was very foolish to give us punch and hot salmon. I shall speak about it to our hostess, the agent's lady. Suppose I were to go back now and say how ill I feel. I fear it would look so ridiculous, and it is not very likely that I should find anyone up." Then he looked for the house, but it was not in existence. "This is really frightful. I cannot even recognize East Street, not a shop to be seen, nothing but old wretched tumble-down houses, just as if I were at Roskilde or Ringsted. Oh, I really must be ill. It is no use to stand upon ceremony. But where in the world is the agent's house? There is a house, but it is not his, and people still up in it, I can hear. Oh dear, I certainly am very queer." As he reached the half-open door, he saw a light and went in. It was a tavern of the olden times, and seemed a kind of beer shop. The room had the appearance of a Dutch interior. A number of people, consisting of seamen, Copenhagen citizens, and a few scholars, sat in deep conversations over their mugs, and took very little notice of the newcomer. "Pardon me," said the councillor, addressing the landlady. "I do not feel quite well, and I should be much obliged if you would send for a fly to take me to Christianshaven." The woman stared at him and shook his head. Then she spoke to him in German. The councillor supposed from this that she did not understand Danish. He therefore repeated his request in German. This, as well as his singular dress, convinced the woman that he was a foreigner. She soon understood, however, that he did not find himself quite well, and therefore brought him a mug of water. It had something of the taste of sea water, certainly, although it had been drawn from the well outside. Then the councillor leaned his head on his hand, drew a deep breath, and pondered over all the strange things that had happened to him. "Is that today's number of the day?" he asked quite mechanically, as he saw the woman putting by a large piece of paper. She did not understand what he meant, but she handed him the sheet. It was a woodcut representing a meteor, which had appeared in the town of Cologne. "That is very old," said the councillor, becoming quite cheerful at the sight of this antique drawing. "Where did you get this singular sheet? It is very interesting. Although the whole affair is a fable, meteors are easily explained in these days. They are northern lights, which are often seen and are no doubt caused by electricity." Those who sat near him and heard what he said looked at him in great astonishment, and one of them rose, took off his hat respectfully, and said in a very serious manner, "You must certainly be a very learned man, monsieur." "Oh, no," replied the councillor. "I can only discourse in topic which everyone should understand." "Modestia is a beautiful virtue," said the man. "Moreover, I must add to your speech, mihi secus videtur, yet in this case I would suspend my judicium." "May I ask to whom I have the pleasure of speaking?" "I am a bachelor of divinity," said the man. This answer satisfied the councillor. The title agreed with the dress. "This is surely," thought he, "an old village schoolmaster, a perfect original, such as one meets with sometimes even in Jutland." "This is not certainly a locus docendi," began the man. "Still, I must beg you to continue the conversation. You must be well read in ancient lore. Oh, yes, replied the counselor. I am very fond of reading useful old books and modern one as well, with the exception of everyday stories, of which we really have more than enough. Everyday stories? Asked the bachelor. Yes, I mean the new novels that we have at present day. Oh, replied the man with a smile, and yet they are very witty and are much read at court. The king likes especially the romance of Messieurs Ifven and Guardian, which describes King Arthur and his knights of the Round Table. He has joked about it with the gentlemen of his court. Well, I have certainly not read that, replied the counsellor. I suppose it is quite new and published by Heiber. No, answered the man, it is not by Heiber. Gottfried von Gehmen brought it out. Oh, is he the publisher? That is a very old name, said the counsellor. Was it not the name of the first publisher in Denmark? Yes, and he is our first printer and publisher now, replied the scholar. So far all had passed off very well, but now one of the citizens began to speak of a terrible pestilence which had been raging a few years before, meaning the plague of 1484. The counsellor thought he referred to the cholera, and they could discuss this without finding out the mistake. The war in 1490 was spoken out of as quite recent. The English pirates had taken some ships in the canal in 1801, and the counsellor, supposing they referred to these, agreed with them in finding fault with the English. The rest of the talk, however, was not so agreeable. Every moment one contradicted the other. The good bachelor appeared very ignorant, for the simplest remark of the counsellor seemed to him either too bold or too fantastic. They stared at each other, and when it became worse, the bachelor spoke Latin in the hope of being better understood. But it was all useless. "How are you now?" asked the landlady, pulling the counsellor's sleeve. Then his recollection returned to him. In the course of conversation he had forgotten all that had happened previously. "Goodness me! Where am I?" said he. It bewildered him as he thought of it. "We will have some claret or mead or Bremen beer," said one of the guests. "Will you drink with us?" Two maids came in. One of them had a cap on her head of two colors. They poured out the wine, bowed their heads, and withdrew. The counsellor felt a cold shiver run all over him. "What is this? What does it mean?" said he, but he was obliged to drink with them, for they overpowered the good man with their politeness. He became at last desperate, and when one of them said he was tipsy, he did not doubt the man's word in the least, only begged them to get a drosky, and then they thought he was speaking the Muscovite language. Never before had he been in such rough and vulgar company. "One might believe that the country was going back to heathenism," he observed. "This is the most terrible moment of my life." Just then it came into his mind that he would stoop under the table and so creep to the door. He tried it, but before he reached the entry, the rest discovered what he was about, and seized him by the feet, when luckily for him off came the goloshes, and with them vanished the whole enchantment. The counsellor now saw quite plainly a lamp and a large building behind it. Everything looked familiar and beautiful. He was in East Street, as it now appears. He lay with his legs turned toward a porch, and just by him sat the watchman, asleep. "Is it possible that I have been lying here in the street dreaming?" said he. "Yes, this is East Street. How beautifully bright and gay it looks. It is quite shocking that one glass of punch should have upset me like this." 2 minutes afterward he sat in a drosky, which was to drive him to Christianshaven. He thought of all the terror and anxiety which he had undergone, and felt thankful from his heart for the reality and comfort of modern times, which, with all its errors, were far better than those in which he so lately found himself. The Watchman's Adventure. Well, I declare there lies a pair of goloshes, said the watchman. No doubt they belong to the lieutenant who lives upstairs. They are lying just by his door. Gladly would the honest man have rung and given them in, for a light was still burning, but he did not wish to disturb the other people in the house, so he let them lie. These things must keep the feet very warm, said he. They are of such a nice soft leather. Then he tried them on, and they fitted his feet exactly. Now, said he, how droll things are in the world. There's that man can lie down in the warm bed, but he does not do so. There he goes pacing up and down the room. He ought to be a very happy man. He has neither wife nor children, and he goes out into company every evening. Oh, I wish I were he. Then I should be a happy man. As he uttered this wish, the goloshes which he had put on took effect, and the watchman at once became the lieutenant. There he stood in his room, holding a little piece of pink paper between his fingers, on which was a poem written by the lieutenant himself. Who has not had for once in his life a moment of poetic inspiration? And at such a moment, if the thoughts are written down, they flow in poetry. The following verses were written on the pink paper. Oh, were I rich! Oh, were I rich! How oft in youth's bright hour the youthful pleasures banished every care. I longed for riches but to gain a power, the thought and plume and uniform to wear. The riches and the honor came for me. Yet still my greatest wealth was poverty. Ah, help and pity me. Once in my youthful hour, when gay and free, a maiden loved me, and her gentle kiss, rich in its tender love and purity, taught me, alas, too much of earthly bliss. Dear child, she only thought of youthful glee. She loved no wealth, but fairy tales and me. Thou knowst, pity me. Oh, were I rich again is all my prayer. That child is now a woman, fair and free, as good, as beautiful as angels are. Oh, were I rich in lovers' poetry, to tell my fairy tale, love's richest lore. But no, I must be silent, I am poor. Ah, wilt thou pity me? Oh, were I rich in truth and peace below, I need not then my poverty bewail. To thee I dedicate these lines of woe. Wilt thou not understand the mournful tale? A leaf on which my sorrows I relate, dark story of a darker night of fate. Ah, bless and pity me. Well, yes, people write poems when they are in love, but a wise man would not print them. A lieutenant in love and poor, this is a triangle, or more properly speaking, the half of the broken die of fortune. The lieutenant felt this very keenly, and therefore leaned his head against the window frame and sighed deeply. The poor watchman in the street, said he, is far happier than I am. He knows not what I call poverty. He has a home and wife and children who weep at his sorrow and rejoice at his joy. Oh, how much happier I should be could I change my being and position with him, and pass through life with his humble expectations and hopes. Yes, he is indeed happier than I am. At this moment the watchman again became a watchman, for having thought of the goloshes of fortune, passed into the existence of the lieutenant, and found himself less content than what he expected. He had preferred his former condition, and wished himself again a watchman. That was an ugly dream, said he, but droll enough. It seemed to me as if I were the lieutenant up yonder, but there was no happiness for me. I missed my wife and the little ones, who were always ready to smother me with kisses. He sat down again and nodded, but he could not get the dream out of his thoughts, and he still had the goloshes on his feet. A falling star gleamed across the sky. There goes one, cried he. However, they are quite enough left. I should very much like to examine these a little nearer, especially the moon, for that could not slip away under one's hands. The student for whom my wife watches says that when we die, we shall fly from one star to another. If that were true, it would be very delightful, but I don't believe it. I wish I could make a little spring up there now. I would willingly let my body lie here on the steps. There are certain things in the world which should be uttered very cautiously, doubly so when the speaker has on his feet the goloshes of fortune. Now we shall hear what happened to the watchman. Nearly everyone is acquainted with the great power of steam. We have proved it by the rapidity with which we can travel, both on a railroad or in a steamship across the sea. But this speed is like the movement of the sloth or the crawling march of the snail when compared to the swiftness with which light travels. Light flies 19 million times faster than the fleetest racehorse, and electricity is more rapid still. Death is an electric shock which we receive in our hearts, and on the wings of electricity the liberated soul flies away swiftly. The light from the sun travels to our earth 95 millions of miles in 8 minutes and a few seconds. But on the wings of electricity, the mind requires only a second to accomplish the same distance. The space between the heavenly bodies is to thought no farther than the distance which we may have to walk from one friend's house to another in the same town. Yet this electric shock obliged us to use our bodies here below, unless, like the watchman, we have on the goloshes of fortune. In a very few seconds the watchman had traveled more than 200,000 miles to the moon, which is formed of a lighter material than our earth, and may be said to be as soft as a new-fallen snow. He found himself on one of the circular range of the mountains, which we see represented in Dr. Matla's large map of the moon. The interior had the appearance of a large hollow bowl shaped with a depth of about half a mile from the brim. Within this hollow stood a large town. We may form some idea of its appearance by pouring the white of an egg into a glass of water. The materials of which it was built seemed just as soft, and pictured forth clouded turrets and sail-like terraces, quite transparent and floating in the thin air. Our earth hung over his head like a green dark red ball. Presently he discovered a number of beings which might certainly be called men, but were very different to ourselves. A more fantastical imagination than Herschel's must have discovered these. Had they been placed in groups and painted, it might have been said, "What beautiful foliage!" They had also a language of their own. No one could have expected the soul of the watchman to understand it, and yet he did understand it, for our souls have much greater capabilities than we are inclined to believe. Do we not, in our dreams, show a wonderful dramatic talent? Each of our acquaintances appear to us then in his own character, and with his own voice. No man could thus imitate them in his waking hours. How clearly, too, we are reminded of the persons whom we have not seen for many years. They start up suddenly to the mind's eyes with all the peculiarities as living realities. In fact, this memory of the soul is a fearful thing. Every sinful thought it can bring back, and we may well ask how we are to give account of every idle word that may have been whispered in the heart or uttered with the lips. The spirit of the watchman therefore understood very well the language of the inhabitants of the moon. They were disputing about our earth, and doubted whether it could be inhabited. The atmosphere, they asserted, must be too dense for any inhabitants of the moon to exist there. They maintained that the moon alone was inhabited, and was really there the heavenly body in which the old world people live. They likewise talked politics. But now we will descend to East Street and see what happened to the watchman's body. He sat lifeless on the steps. His staff had fallen out of his hand, and his eyes stared at the moon, about about which his honest soul was wondering. What is it, O clock watchman? Inquired a passenger, but there was no answer from the watchman. The man then pulled his nose gently, which caused him to lose his balance. The body fell forward and lay at full length on the ground as one dead. All his comrades were more frightened, for he seemed quite dead. They still allowed him to remain after they had given notice of what had happened, and at dawn the body was carried to the hospital. We might imagine it to be no jesting matter if the soul of the man should chance to return to him, for most probably it would seek for the body in East Street without being able to find it. We might fancy the soul inquiring of the police, or at the address office, or among the missing parcels, and then at length finding at the hospital. But we may comfort ourselves by the certainty that the soul, when acting upon its own impulses, is wiser than we are. It is the body that makes it stupid. As we have said, the watchman's body had been taken to the hospital, and here it was placed in a room to be washed. Naturally, the first thing done here was to take off the goloshes, upon which the soul was instantly obliged to return, and it took the direct route to the body at once, and in a few seconds the man's life returned to him. He declared, when he quite recovered himself, that this has been the most dreadful night he had ever passed. Not for £100 would he go through such feelings again. However, it was all over now. The same day he was allowed to leave, but the goloshes remained at the hospital. And we're going to stop here. I will read you the next few chapters in my next video. So please return next Saturday for the rest of the story. I hope you enjoyed this half, and I'm looking forward to see you again next week. Please don't forget to give a thumbs up, and have a great day, evening, whatever you are having right now, and I will see you in my next video. Bye everybody. Love you.